Hi, I'm Manal and
And I'm Ali Albi.
We're in SMED 360 research method. We had the opportunity the last week to teach in Grayson County High School. We taught 4 classes. They were 9th grades, integrated science. We taught a lesson for 4 classes. It was about estimation and measurement, the length of an object.
The 4 classes that we taught, as previously stated, were 9th grade integrated science. We did an inquiry-based lesson about measurement. We had 2 lesson objectives, which were that the students will be able to predict the length of an object in centimeters and then measure that object in centimeters with a ruler. We began the lesson with an engagement portion in which each group of 4 students received an object, and they had 2 minutes to list all the ways that that object could be measured. The students listed measurements such as length, height, weight, and diameter. After the 2 minutes were up, the students were called upon to list their object in one way that they could measure their object.
For the exploration part, we find a fun activity. It's called scavenger hunt. Basically, the students have to just go walk around and find objects. They chose the objects and they need to do the actual measurement using the ruler. So they have the opportunity to just explore and find the models by themselves and do the real measurement. So it was a good activity. It took them like 10 minutes to finish them. And after that, they need to record their finding on a poster board.
As the explore portion of the lesson began, each group of students received handouts that displayed a table, and each table was complete with 10 measurements from 1 to 35 in various intervals. And each student in each group had 2 minutes to look around the classroom and find 10 objects that would satisfy those measurements. They weren't allowed to walk around the room. They simply could stand up and scan around the room to discuss objects that they predicted were those measurements. After the students made their predictions, the students had 10 minutes to walk around the room, measure the objects they predicted, and then record the actual length. So they were able to see how their estimations or their predictions compared with the actual length of each object. During the exploration of this lesson, the students participated in a scavenger hunt. Each student was given a table that had 10 measurements on it, ranging from 1 centimeter to 35 centimeters, a column that would be allowed to predict objects that satisfied these measurements, and then a column for actual measurements. While participating in the scavenger hunt, each student got out to measure their object predictions and report that on their table, and then each group was given a large poster board where they were able to record their findings. The students basically recorded that same table on their poster board, and then they were encouraged to present this to the class. To assess individual learning within the group, I asked that each student would have a speaking part. The presentations were about 2 minutes each, and that's how we concluded the explanation portion of the lesson.
Okay, in the elaboration, we were planning actually, we brought some toys. I brought some toys from my house, and we were planning to just pick an object and create a competition, so everybody will estimate the length of this object, and we wrote down like all the answer on the board, and we will pick the right answer, so we can evaluate the students' learning. Do they estimate right, or how close their answer were to the right answers? But the problem is like we ran out of time, so we couldn't finish it. Even when we planned it, and we were really thinking like to finish it, but we couldn't. But all the students get the chance to do the explanation, so everybody get the chance to talk and explain. So which we thought like it was really good.
Mm-hmm. We felt that allowing the students to stand up in front of the class and report their findings was more important than creating a competition.
Exactly.
For the evaluation portion of this lesson, we began by giving the students a pre-assessment. The pre-assessment was complete with 3 questions. The first question asked the students to circle all of the examples that would most likely be measured in centimeters. The options were the weight of a ladybug, the length of a fingernail, the length of a pencil, and there were more. The second question asked students to estimate the length of a school bus. Not an actual school bus, but the one on the paper, and it was about 9 centimeters long. And then the third question asked the students to actually measure an object. The paper had a ruler printed on it with an object above it for the students to measure. We ended the lesson with this same assessment, but it was the post-assessment to evaluate the students' learning throughout the lesson and to make sure they met the objectives.
Regarding the experimental design question, there are 3 questions. The first question was, what aspects of guiding your students through the process of experimental design do you feel were successful? Please explain and provide evidence. The second question was, what aspects of guiding your students through the process of experimental design were not as successful as you had hoped? Please explain and provide evidence. The third question was, what advice would you provide to future students about trying to guide students through the process of experimental design?
We're not able to answer question 1 and 2 because we were required to teach at a school that is very tied to their curriculum map, and we were given a lesson that we were required to teach, and we were not able to implement experimental design into our lesson. However, we would advise future students to try their best to teach at a school that would allow some flexibility regarding experimental design so that they will allow you to implement this into your lesson. These questions are regarding the de-cookbooking the lab. The first question is, what was the general structure of the original cookbook lab?
Thinking about the original cookbook lab, for me it was kind of formative assessment. It includes many questions that, for example, like how much does this unit equal? Or used a metric ruler to just measure the length of this object. So it was like a worksheet. It didn't include any activity at all. So we were planning to just change most of it. It was like a worksheet, not a cookbook lab. And the next question was, the second question was, how did you modify the original structure for your new lesson? What did you keep the same? What did you change? How did you rearrange it? And what did you add?
We basically modified this lab completely. We made it an inquiry-based activity, and what we kept was the idea of measurement and measuring length. But what we did was we implemented a fun activity so that the students would enjoy learning how to measure with a ruler. We arranged this so that the students began with an activity where they had to list all the measurements regarding an object. Then they had to estimate objects and go around the room and measure them. And then they were able to record their findings and report them to the entire class. This is how we changed our lab into an inquiry-based lab, so that the students would enjoy learning about measurement. The third question asks, what was the hardest part about converting the cookbook lab?
We think the hardest part about converting the cookbook lab was finding a fun activity. Because, you know, the subject of this lesson was about length. We thought like it's a really dry subject. It was so hard on us to find a fun activity, which took us more than 2 weeks to find one. We thought that like the student will like it. So it was about scavenger hunt. So and the student, they seemed that they like it. Everybody was exploring. Everybody was enjoying the activity. So
and it was also very difficult to find a fun activity that would also meet the objectives that we listed for this lesson. So that was also a very difficult part for de-cookbooking our lab.